Hi, I'm Leo Caster, I'm a landscape photographer. Today I'll be talking a little bit about how I approach landscape photography. One of the first things to do is how to find a location. A good way is to look on some of the online photo sharing sites such as Flickr. You can look at geotagged items there, so you can look on a map, find locations around where you are and where you can head to. And that's a good way of finding sort of where there's some promising compositions. Ordnance survey maps, another great resource. They have lots of things marked on there such as windmills, ruins, towers, that kind of thing. Anything that can make a good focal point. So I carry a little ordnance survey map on my phone, which I quite often use if I'm in an area I'm not familiar with. What I look for in a location is I quite often am looking for that standalone element within the landscape. Might be a boat shed or a tree that stands apart from some others. Something that adds kind of a little bit of importance to that focal point within the image. Maybe that's as a result of kind of the locations where I tend to go in East Anglia, where it's quite a large empty landscape in the main, so that single item can often have more gravitas. There are several factors I consider before heading out on a shoot. I quite often shoot at sunrise, so getting there in the dark is often the case, and it's good to be aware of where you're heading to first. So if I haven't been to a location before, I'll look at it on the maps, make sure there's somewhere I can see where I can park, be aware of any tide time. So I quite often use a few apps on my phone. There's the Photographer's Ephemeris, TPE as it's known, which is great. You can log locations in there. So if you see somewhere of interest as you're driving along, take a quick photo, mark it on the map, and then you can make some notes about it, and it's great for finding locations in future. But I'll check the tide times, try and find a tide going out is generally my preferred option. That way it avoids me being cut off. I'll check sunrise time or sunset time, work out the angles of the sun so that I've got an appreciation of what the conditions are going to be like before I get there. In terms of equipment, I tend to take, if I'm going fairly close to the car, I'll take as much as I can, because I hate being at a location and a shot coming up and I'm not having the gear to be able to shoot it, not having the right lens or whatsoever. So I try to take as much as I can, but obviously sometimes if you're going on a longer walk or if conditions are tricky, you don't want to be carrying unnecessary weights. I'll generally take a wide lens and a long lens and cope without the in-between, should I be carrying light. So most of my work is done very early in the morning. I tend to sort of get to a location half an hour before sunrise. I particularly like the quality of light you get at sunrise. You get the cold tones, and it's great, particularly down by the sea. You get that you get a subdued lighting, which I think is really good for adding a bit of atmosphere to shots. And it's quite an uplifting experience on a morning to be there for sunrise. You very rarely see anyone else about, so you don't have to worry about people wandering in and out of shots. And it's a great time to be out taking pictures. When I get to a location, I'll usually have a little wander about, looking for potential shots. If it's somewhere I'm familiar with, I might have somewhere in mind. If it's somewhere new, then I'll tend to just wander about. I quite often put my camera on live view and look around, just so I get a sense of what it's going to look like with a certain lens on. And sometimes a shot will jump out at you that you can't really see that clearly when you're looking yourself. But if you look through your wide-angle lens, it's suddenly, it can transform it. In terms of settings, I tend to start on pretty much the same settings most of the time. I'll nearly always be on ISO 100 because I'm on a tripod. I don't need to worry about movement too much, and I quite like the effects of a fairly long exposure, so it's not something I'm particularly trying to avoid a lot of the time. I tend to shoot around kind of f11 and below. I rarely go above that, to be honest, because I don't have a particular desire for real sharpness from front to back. I quite like the drop off that you get at a smaller aperture where your background's fading out a little bit. I like that. I think it adds some depth to an image. So often around f8, f11, around those margins. Shutter speed was therefore dictated to by the light, and because I'm often shooting early on a morning, that generally often leads to a 20-second shutter speed, something like that. Great for movement on water. I like the long exposure effect you get without it being a very long exposure of sort of 2 or 3 minutes, because I like a little bit of detail retained in the water when I'm shooting the sea. Once you're at a location, a good idea is to get the shot that feels like the right shot, and then have a good wander around, maybe change lenses, and try and get some new angles on things, because often you'll find that you think you've got the shot of the day that you're happiest with, and then once you start kind of feeling satisfied with that, other opportunities will jump out at you, and you'll start looking at things slightly differently because you're satisfied with what you've got. You start then sort of looking at other stuff in more detail, and that's when the more interesting, unusual shots can most often happen, I think. A few little tips of the way I shoot, which I find really help me, is I nearly always use live view. I think it's really good for making you consider your composition. You look around the edges of the frame, you're a bit more considered in your approach, whereas when you're looking through the viewfinder, because it's not as comfortable for me personally, I find that I just put more consideration in when I'm shooting on live view. I also use manual focus pretty much 100% of the time. With manual focus, I can set the focus, I'm on a tripod, and it doesn't change to the next shot, so I can set the focus and wait, I can have a good look at things, I can change some settings and the focus will stay the same. I tend to zoom in to maximum magnification on the live view, focus on a particular point, and then that will be as sharp an image as I can hope for then. Another way of ensuring sharper images is to try and not touch your camera during an exposure. You can either use the cable releases, but I use these infrared remotes, which I generally have one in my coat pocket, one in my trouser pocket, just so I've always got one ready to hand, and that just literally fires the shutter without me touching the camera, avoids that tiny little bit of camera shake, so it all leads to a sharper image. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to keep an eye out on the Wex blog for more videos in this series.